make sure it's on the same.
When is your documentary coming out?
I would love to say December 2022, but probably first quarter of 23. It's interesting hearing some of the testimony because the basic premise of the last one was electricity as a human right. Like that's how it wrapped. But a lot of ours was more about energy poverty and, you know, the average resident of India uses less electricity in a year than a typical American refrigerator, that kind of stuff. So it was, what is it, 1 billion people in the world today have zero access to electricity. So energy poverty was the crux of the last one, whereas this time kind of made sense to talk about what went on at home.
I mean, it is a thing. We are very fortunate. At the same time, we don't take advantage of that, you know.
For sure.
We don't share it very well. We don't share it very well. Wasn't there a book about all you know learned in
Kindergarten.
Yeah, that's right.
It's also a really good poster.
It is a good cat poster. Yeah, we have the resources to fix all this, but we don't.
Gotta put our minds to work.
I was telling there's a gentleman named Ed Hurst that wrote a piece in 2013 kind of prophesizing what happened last year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and his thinking is it goes back to deregulation in '93, which California did first. And so our film's focusing how California and Texas got there two different ways. The thing with Texas is it rewards volatility rather than reliability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
When things get crazy, it's like a casino.
yeah, prices.
And California is not that way.
California's not that way. Theirs have a lot more to do with regulation on certain power types, and that's either electricity it's inexpensive, which disproportionately impacts people of color and low-income folks. So it's two very different ways that we got to the same unfortunate outcome.
But here we are now with very expensive energy. This is where we ended up, right? In the energy capital of the country.
The paper today talked about it's the driest now it has been in 12,000 years. Not in Texas in particular.
In Brazil, it's like that.
Mainly west of Texas, the little corner of southwest, and then 12,000.
Brazil's going to pass. They've typically been all geothermal, but they have insane droughts going on right now.
I don't know. Maybe it's 1,200.
So we have
It's still a lot.
I was like a little chiseling.
So we have Beto as our last speaker, and then when he gets on, we can go. And then if you guys just want to. Well, that's it. He's supposed to get on at 4:25.
Well, I think he's gonna want to do it. Okay, I'll do it. You're good.
Okay, she said he's logging on now.
Elise.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You are, we say best for last. So, Beto O'Rourke, the floor is yours.
Representative Goodwin, thank you for allowing me to join you and your colleagues. And thank you for what you all are doing to make sure that the full story is told about what happened to our fellow Texans over the course of the winter storm and the power grid failure last year. I think it is just so important that we elevate the stories of our fellow Texans, regardless of who they are, where they live, what differences there may exist between us. The fact that they in no way caused the problem through which they had to suffer, and in many cases ended up paying the ultimate price of their lives. In other cases, losing family members or suffering significant and sometimes catastrophic damage to their homes. It's critical that we make sure that the people of Texas know that their stories are known to us and then elevated and shared with the rest of the state. At the same time that we acknowledge that not only did the people of Texas have nothing to do with the causes of this problem, it was fully within the control of those in the highest positions of power and public trust in this state. In other words, it was not an accident. It was not just the weather or an act of God or by force of Mother Nature. It was within the ability of those who lead this state to prevent this kind of tragedy and disaster, and still within the power of those who lead the state to fix it before it's too late. In other words, before we have another severe or extreme weather event in the state of Texas. Representative Goodwin, I would just want to share with you that as I have been traveling this state, I've been asking the communities in which I visit to share with me their stories, both the sad ones and also the very positive ones. Stories like Donna Boatwright in West Texas, in Abilene, who shared with me the extraordinary story of her marriage to Benny Boatwright and their life together, and the fact that they even worked in the same factory together at U.S. Brass until that factory closed in 2000. And then Benny went on to work at Dyess Air Force Base, greeting incoming family members, U.S. service members. Donna went on to become a church secretary. And if that's Representative Talarico there, he'll like this story. She said, "It's the best job I've ever had. I get to go to church every single day." But when the temperature dropped in Abilene, and when they could no longer heat their home because the electricity had gone out, she, on the third or fourth day, she can't remember, she says that she really lost track of time and the memory almost altogether. She discovered that her husband, Benny, was dead. Despite the number of blankets she had piled on top of him, he was unable to survive the severe weather. And the fact that in the energy capital of the world, we weren't able to keep the power flowing to the people who needed it most at their most vulnerable moment. Donna told me many great stories about Benny. To meet him was to love him, she told me. And also just shared with me how badly she misses him 1 year out from his death. Hearing stories like Donna's and Benny's in Abilene, or meeting the family of Donna Keel here Deborah Keel here in Houston, where I am today, who also died a year ago, almost to the day. What she meant to her sisters and brother, to the countless people she counseled as a drug counselor in Houston, and her plans for her post-retirement life. She was 67 years old and literally was on the verge of retiring, and she was going to travel the world. It's so helpful for me to hear her story as well and to know what might have been. Those stories are so personal to the people who have lived them, the loved ones that they have lost, the communities that are the poorer for no longer having them. And those stories extend across our state more than 700 times over. And that's not to mention the people who, of course, lost power for days, who were shoveling snow in your community of Austin to put in the toilet so that they could flush the toilet, or those who just really were on the verge of not being able to make it through, but through some miracle they did. And the miracle, of course, was the people of Texas, the people who knocked on their neighbors' doors, regardless of whether they knew them or not, or any difference that might be between them, party affiliation, religion, immigration status, or anything else that's really meaningless when you're up against the odds that they faced last year, and when what you really need more than anything else is just to make that connection and to ensure that someone has a warm place to go to, or a meal that they can count on, or some water if their pipes had frozen. And we saw that countless times across the state of Texas, people stepping up and being there for one another. And Representative Goodwin, I saw you at an event last week where we got to see and hear from the extraordinary Reverend Dominique Robinson, who said something that was really powerful. She said, at that moment, we became the grid. We became the light. We became the warmth for one another, even if those in power could not keep the power flowing to the people of the state. We were not going to let that stand in the way of stepping up and standing up and being counted in service to one another. And it makes me so proud. And I hope that that same spirit of being there for one another prevails at this moment, where you have a state so deeply divided and so highly polarized, and so many people encouraged to be pitted against one another. If we could come together again and make sure that we make the changes necessary to guarantee that you never have the lights and the heat and the water go out in the state of Texas, and get back to focusing on the big things that really improve, enrich, and make our lives better, then there's really no stopping us. And so I'm so grateful for you and your colleagues for hosting this, for inviting the people of Texas to testify, and for sharing and elevating these stories of our friends and neighbors and family members from across Texas. We are a better state for this, and much more likely ultimately to get on the right track and to fix this so this never happens again. So thank you so much for receiving and accepting my testimony, and for keeping the focus on this so that we get it right.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining us today. It's really been an incredible amount of testimony, everything from a data analyst telling us why the 246 deaths is likely over 800, to our emergency workers telling us stories of being in an ambulance and having to rescue cars that had stalled out on overpasses, and just the different stories from different perspectives, which the point of today being to keep the pressure on our leaders, on our ERCOT, the Railroad Commission, PUC, to make sure that we don't let this thing happen again. And should we have another weather event similar to last year's winter storm, that we have better responses to it. So thank you for joining us today. Any questions?
Hi, Beto. I want to speak to this concept of the people of Texas being the grid for one another. And I remember during that time, you drove from El Paso, where you all were fine. You all had power, and you came to help us. And I know it wasn't just Austin, but it was across the state, where you drove through treacherous conditions. I'm sure your mom did not appreciate that. But you drove through treacherous conditions to help us out. And I want to say thank you. I remember being at a site with you where water was being passed out, and it wasn't just your help, but you brought with you a network of volunteers that we desperately needed to fill in the gaps, and who were just waiting for someone to tell them what to do to help one another. I'm also remembering an event where we heard that local farmers had to harvest all their produce early because of the freeze, but they had no way to get it out. And so all this produce was going to go to waste. We had families whose food was rotten in their refrigerators. And so we had the Austin Latino Coalition organize at a elementary school in the district I represent a food drive, we bought the produce from the farmers, and we gave it to the community members who needed healthy food, access to healthy food. And those are just a couple of stories that that really gives me pride about who we are. And you're right, we are a proud people. We should be able to do so much more as Texans. We have the resources, and hearing these stories, we're hoping creates a will to get that done, because we're we have the wherewithal, we just need the political will. So I want to thank you for also taking the time to highlight these stories and for joining us here today.
It's my pleasure, Representative Hinojosa, and I tell you, I'm also just as encouraged as you are, and as angry as we all are at those who are responsible for this, including, corporations and gas supply CEOs and traders. $11 billion in profit over the course of 5 days, while people were literally freezing to death in their homes or out in their vehicles. The people who are in the highest positions of power, who are captured by these same interests and have essentially been paid not to fix the grid and to address things like the gas supply or interconnecting ERCOT with the nation's grid or fighting for the ratepayers you all are trying to do right now. We cannot allow that to drive us to despair, right? Because as you pointed out, there were so many good people who did so many good things for one another, so many of them completely unheralded. We'll never know their stories, but we know that they're out there because we saw enough other people doing exactly that same kind of thing. In the Rio Grande Valley, which I know you're super familiar with, we were in Brownsville in February, and as you know, Representative Hinojosa, so many of those farm workers are living in cardboard paper thin trailers and working the toughest jobs you can imagine. And when we encountered them during that storm in February, they were getting warm outside, putting fires into trash cans, keeping themselves alive, and then going out and working because they had to continue to do that work to keep their families alive. And there were organizations like Lupe and other nonprofit charities who were literally delivering prepaid debit cards. They may have $100 or $200, and saying to these families, if you need to take some time off of work so you can take care of yourselves and keep your kids alive, literally, here's some money. And whether you need to buy fuel or food or water, we just want to make sure that you are taken care of. And then seeing you all in Austin again in February, and not only helping to deliver water, but just being amazed that the line to pick up water and take it to those who were unable to leave their homes was almost as long as a line of people coming to get, supplies for themselves. In other words, there's a real selflessness in this state that I think defines us far better and more accurately than the selfishness that we saw by those who decided to make profit off of this, whether politically or financially. So thank you for elevating these stories. And I just love what you all are doing and love that you're not dropping this, because though we had a winter storm 2 weeks ago, we all know that it was relatively mild. The temperatures did not drop as low as they had last year. The duration was not as long. It was in no way the real test that we faced back last February. But the energy and electricity experts tell us that if we do not make the changes that you all are advocating for, we will see additional blackouts when we have severe and extreme weather again. We will most likely again see deaths and property damage, and it will dramatically decrease the competitiveness of this state for investment, for talent, and for the kinds of people who can best exemplify what we are all about, the ones that you're highlighting in the testimony that you all received today. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, any closing remarks, anybody?
Yeah, I just want to say, I thought this was a good idea, Representative Goodwin, when you first expressed a desire to have a people's hearing. And at the end of it now, I'm even more convinced that it was the right thing to do. We get so busy in our work of policy making and trying to find those policy solutions that I think it's too easy to lose sight of the pain and suffering that Texans experience, the real pain and real suffering. And to hear from people who lost loved ones now, a year later, as they're experiencing the 1 year anniversary, is important. It's important because these are real people's lives, and and we can do something about it. So I just want to thank you for really sticking to this plan and making sure it happened, leading this effort, because it was so worthwhile.
Thank you.
Just want to echo Gina as always, and also congratulations to your staff. 'Cause
Yes.
I know, good job. And your whole team. This is not an easy thing to do, especially when we didn't have support from the leadership in this body. Your team did this all on their own. And honestly, this was a better run hearing than many that I've participated in the legislature. So anyway, congratulations to you and Pooja and the whole team. And thank you for putting in all the work to do this. And I know my team is appreciative and my constituents.
Yeah, well, a couple of people had commented that we don't have more representatives here, but I do think representatives tuned in, and there is still the opportunity to watch it since it has been recorded. There's so much good information that was shared today. We have our work cut out for us, and so I will wrap it up with that. Thank you.